Hello everybody and welcome to my new channel Moon Mountain Mahayana, which is basically an ongoing love letter to the Mahayana Buddhist tradition in its many forms, but I'll also talk occasionally about other comparative religious topics and things that interest me. So, originally I wanted to start this with an episode about how to approach the works of Zen master Dogen that a lot of you may have heard about, especially in the last couple of years. There's been a renewed interest due to a number of factors. The other reason why that seemed a good idea is that I'm a teacher in the Soto Zen tradition. But then again, I want this particular channel to reflect or be a wider scope. It's basically me sharing a perspective, my perspective, on why I love all these practice traditions and what those traditions mean to me and what related topics might trigger inside me. Having said that, I abandoned the original idea for starting with the Dogen episode. It's coming up. But instead, I wanted to briefly talk about approaching the Mahayana Buddhist tradition in general, or how I approached it and how I continue to approach it. Now, we could simply start by looking at the word. I mean, that's what you do. You define terms. So, literally, Mahayana is a Sanskrit word. Maha meaning great, and yana, vehicle, although some experts say that etymologically it might also mean way. But the most common translation by far is great vehicle. Now, that sounds great. It's not a terrible pun. It sounds wonderful, and I love using it because to me, the greatness has a particular meaning that is different from the historical context. Because I think the fancy word is a self-appellation is something that somebody or a group calls themselves, and that's what Mahayana is. A certain group of people decided at some point to call the Mahayana in contrast to what they saw as the Hinayana, which means literally small or maybe deficient or broken vehicle, referring to the earliest strands of what one could call, in a general way, early mainstream Buddhism. Now, of course, we can go down the historical route and look at the evidence and see what academics say, which is what I love to do because I'm quite nerdy when it comes to that. That type of approach may be intimately related to how you ultimately judge, envision, and deal with Mahayana in general, but it doesn't have to be the exact same as how you actually just experience what the legacy of Mahayana is. If you're interested in the academic side, I can really recommend this book edited by Paul Harrison. I don't know if you can see it. I'm going to put it in the clip description. It's called Setting Out on the Great Way, Essays on Early Mahayana Buddhism. And there's obviously still so much work to be done, but this reflects more or less the latest generation of scholarship up to a certain degree. It's already been a few years since this has been out, but the problem is these days that, well, not just these days, but the issue is that often by the time that there's been a bit of a paradigm shift in how the experts, the academic experts, see something, there's a long time lag until some of those new findings, if you know, they kind of stand the test of time and a lot of critical prodding, then it takes a long time for that to filter back into the more common knowledge pool of maybe people who are educated about a lot of topics, but who may not be experts. And so the problem is that for the most part, a lot of people are still stuck with this view that was quite prevalent in the middle of the 20th century, that thinks that Mahayana was mainly maybe a lay movement, and that there was a very clear distinction. Actually, I pulled up this, I think there was an interview with Harrison where he said, I think I made a note of that, Scholars thought Mahayana Buddhism was developed by lay people who wanted to make a Buddhism for everybody. It was compared to the Protestant movement in Christianity, but we now know that this picture is not true. That's what Harrison said, and it just underlines the point I was just trying to make. Now, how do I use this term? I'm actually going to talk about this in a second, but before that, instead of reinventing the wheel, I'm just going to quote a few lines from the hefty Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism, and I realize again I should have put in some extra light in here. It does cost some money, but it's a pretty good reference in general, so I love my Princeton Dictionary of Buddhism, and I wish I'd had it many, many years earlier. But there you go. So it starts with Mahayana, in Sanskrit, great vehicle, a term originally of self-appellation, which is used historically to refer to a movement that began some 4 centuries after the Buddha's death, marked by the composition of texts that purported to be his words. Although ranging widely in content, these texts generally set forth the bodhisattva path to Buddhahood as the ideal to which all should aspire, and described bodhisattvas and Buddhas as objects of devotion. The key doctrines of the Mahayana include the perfection of wisdom, prajna paramita, the skillful methods, upaya kaushalya, of a Buddha, the 3 bodies, trikaya, of a Buddha, the inherency of Buddha nature, buddhadhatu, tathagata garpa, and pure lands or Buddha fields, Buddha kshetra. So that's just the beginning. It's a longer entry, but since this is on YouTube, you can just stop it and listen to me saying it once more. You can just invest in a copy of the Dictionary of Buddhism. Now, why I love to continue to use the term Mahayana for this plethora, another fancy word that I love, because English is not my first language, but I just love the word plethora. So the plethora of practice traditions, of amazing texts, of amazing teachers, of the life experiences of so many countless of inspired practitioners that we can still draw on. That, to me, is what makes the Mahayana so amazing. And to me, it is truly great because it offers such an immensely inspiring diversity of practice approaches that over time have spawned their own schools with their own doctrines, with their own demarcations, with their own definitions of heresies, and, all the kind of problems you get when you institutionalize things. On the other hand, if you don't institutionalize certain traditions at all, then there's a very good chance that as time passes, they're just going to disappear. Of course, people can have different views on this, and I'm going to make an episode at some point about the pros and cons of having institutions clearly represent and define certain practice strands. But at this point, I just want to say it's absolutely amazing what a treasure trove we can still draw on. And even although there's still so much that needs to be translated, and also we're right at the beginning of a process of Mahayana growing roots in the West, and that process is probably going to take 200-300 years until we've developed a common lingua franca, a common language across, I guess, Western cultures that enables us to go even deeper with our practice in relation to the text. At the moment, a lot of teachers, a lot of schools are doing their best to create this foundation, but it's all very patchworky stuff, to be perfectly honest. And there are a lot of issues when it comes to translations, because it's not just a question of right or wrong, it's a question, what does a particular translator or teacher actually mean when he or she decides to translate a certain term, which sometimes leads to people who do not have the chance to study with qualified teachers. It leads to people just filling in the blanks or just using what they know so far, or what they think they know, to then make sense of these texts. But even just something, let's say the word mind, for example, if you read it in English or a Western language, if you don't really know what mind a certain text is really referring to, then you might just add to your delusion. But that's another discussion. I would just want to point to this very well-known and by now, sadly, almost cliched story that originally comes from the Zen tradition, as far as I know, of a student approaching a teacher with an empty cup. The story is, depending on how you tell it, is that somebody whom we could call a student met with a teacher slash master, and the master slash teacher kept pouring tea into the student's already filled teacup until it overflowed. And in a sense, what this can point to is that since a lot of people in Western countries have the privilege of having received a lot of education, it makes us think that we basically already know all this stuff. We just need one or two little pointers, but we already understand everything. And of course, that is not the case. If you encounter a culture or a religious culture or religious tradition that really is different in some key points from the culture that you grow up in, you actually have to empty your cup, so to speak. What most of us like to do, because most of us, including myself, are really lazy, is we don't really want to empty. We just want to empty it a little bit and maybe add another top layer to make it look great. I guess like very skilled baristas. I don't know where this lame coffee analogy came from, but I just love coffee. But what you really need to do is actually empty the cup in order to receive the teachings. And later on, you can, of course, still then look at what these teachings really mean in your life, how you can verify these teachings or what these teachings actually are, if you were actually taught by proper teachers. But if you just go for the top layer, so you just want to add that little cherry to something to make it look nice, but you're not really open to the possibility of truly emptying your cup, then how can you ever engage with something that may not be who or what you are right now? Because ultimately then you just want to find a different way to worship who you are anyway, just give it a nice new outer layer. Of course, the trouble is that a lot of us who really virtuously would then completely empty our cup often have the tendency to empty the cup of common sense as well. And the tricky part here is that, of course, if you don't have common sense, then nobody can protect you from abuse in a lot of different ways. Because whenever something is powerful and intimate, that's when there's a lot of maybe people, organizations who will try to exploit the fact that there is something that may have a powerful impact on you and may lead you to really invest in terms of money, but more in terms of your life in order to explore that. So that's why it's a bit of a koan in itself to empty the cup, but then retain enough common sense to not be too easily abused by people who want to make use of your initially amazing idealism. I love the Mahayana, and although I originally come from the Soto Zen tradition, I personally do not feel comfortable with the way that history has led to these organizations who created doctrines that make a lot of these Mahayana practices mutually exclusive. Of course, the Mahayana is not something streamlined, and there are amazing contradictions in it, depending on which approach or which text you use to build the real foundation of your view, of your fundamental practice outlook. But that in itself can be a creative process. However, there definitely were, as far as we know now, periods and places where the modern day sectarianism, the institutionalized hard border sectarianism, was not that strong. So it would have allowed for more exchange. And even people with different practices may have lived in the same monastery. Of course, that's a huge topic. My point is that the Mahayana, if you go to the original texts, there is so much wisdom that is being shared. There are so many gates of awakening that you can enter into, hopefully guided by somebody who's a good spiritual friend and has a bit of experience on the path. But they very often are not closed off and mutually exclusive, so that the Mahayana, although it's very amorphous and can't be nailed down, is an amazing umbrella term, a cornucopia of gateways to awakening. And I cannot stress enough how, after all these years, and I took refuge in 2006, not 16, how amazingly inspiring the world of the Mahayana is. And of course, where there's humans, there are human problems. And where there's idealism, you will be disillusioned, and not necessarily in a nice way. But all I can say is that we can all benefit from acknowledging that whilst not all ways may lead to Rome, and I don't believe that. I'm not a perennialist, and I also don't believe that every practice tradition has the same worth or depth, or could lead to the same depth. But nevertheless, the more we acknowledge that there are so many different yet amazingly authentic and true practice paths, the more we can support each other. Because I think the real problem we're facing in this world, especially in the West, is not that somebody's following the wrong school of Mahayana. The problem is that most of us simply worship money and power above all else. So we should try to support those individuals we meet who do honestly want to orient themselves towards a path of wisdom and compassion, and who orient themselves towards something that is greater than themselves, that does not just serve status, ego, power, and money. So in this case, we can support one another on the path of awakening, although what that even means may be different depending on which part of the Mahayana spectrum we're on, or how we even define or delineate some of those terms. But in any case, I think you understand what I'm trying to get across, that the Mahayana is truly a great vehicle. It is amazing what we have access to if we only make a little bit of effort. Whether we sit zazen, chant the nembutsu, do certain visualization practices, or follow Vajrayana esoteric paths, it is an amazing opportunity for us in this super precious, impermanent lifetime to engage with these teachings. And that's why I would like to invite you to consider, to look more deeply into what the Mahayana may have to offer you, this amazing tapestry of living wisdom traditions that follow the Bodhisattva ideal and that are oriented towards approaching this path of practice with a great focus on compassion and wisdom. Thank you for listening to my rambling, and I'll try to add some episodes. I'm not trying to convert anybody. I'm not trying to gain 1 million subscribers or anything like this. Of course, I'd be super happy if over the next couple of years there would be 200 or 300 or 400 people following my ramblings who can get something out of it, or who might be triggered into asking themselves the right questions. If you want to ask any questions to me, then you can send an email to moonmountain@gmx.de. I will deactivate the comment section because, sadly, over the last 15, 20 years, I've never had any truly positive experiences with people interacting on the YouTube comment sections. It's just something that I find has a tendency to go pear-shaped very, very quickly. So if something's not important enough to you to write me an email, then, I mean, there also wouldn't have been enough of a reason to actually write a nasty or a nice comment. But if something is really bugging you, or you really want to ask a particular question, just feel free to send me an email, and I'll try to answer it in due time. Have a wonderful week, and thank you for listening.